Greetings to my adorable students across the continent. The goal is to reach as many African students, exposing you to recommended poems and novels in your West African Senior School Certificate Examination organized by the West African Examination Council WAEC. Now, all your recommended texts in WAEC are just the same thing that the Nigerian candidates will need in their NECO examination. And in today's lecture, the subject is literature in English language, and I'll focus solely on poetry. I'll focus on poetry. You remember that poetry is one of the genres of literature, and the poem under consideration is Raider of the Treasure Trove, written by Lade, Wosornu. And in this lecture, we'll focus on the literary devices used in the poem. Before we move on, I'll need to intimate you with the behavioral objectives. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to aptly describe treasure trove. You should be able to describe what a trove is. That's supposed to be a collection of jewelries. You should be able to aptly describe treasure trove, list 5 figures of speech used in the poem. Now, when I say 5 figures of speech, I mean you can have examples of metaphor, of simile, of personification, which we have in abundance. You can talk of imagery, enjambment. We'll discuss some of these in this lecture, and I expect you to list at least 5 figures of speech used in the poem Raider of the Treasure Trove. And apart from this, I will expect you to cite 4 examples of rhetorical questions in the poem. Just 4 examples of rhetorical questions in the poem. That means I will expect you to pick 4 lines where the poet uses rhetorical questions to convey his ideas to the readers, and should be able to explain the poet's use of imagery. Certain images are painted in this poem. Obviously, we have different types of imagery. You should be able to explain the poet's use of imagery in this poem. Now here you can see the reference books. We have Nwachukwu Agbada et al. 2019. That's example course Literature in English 2021 to 2025. It is a textbook that contains all the necessary poems and the text that we will need generally, at least between now and 2025. Yes, I want to believe that even if you do not have this, you can always have other supplementary copies, but this again is a sufficient material. Okay, the next image that you see then is the treasure trove. That's where you have the collection of jewelries. Now, if you now say Raider of the Treasure Trove, if someone comes around to plunder this, to steal this, to pilfer it, that's the raider, and obviously that's where the poet derives the title of the poem, Raider of the Treasure Trove. Now, of course, obviously what's the Raider of the Treasure Trove in this poem is rage. Rage. The poet says that the purpose of human existence is to be wellspring of joy unto others. But there's something that can truncate that, and that is rage. And this rage is often caused by our perception, by human perception, which the poet describes as inconsequential, as non-existent, as irrelevant, as unreal. And that's why he warns against accommodating unfounded thoughts in our hearts. Now to the poem Raider of the Treasure Trove. I believe some of you recited this poem before you went on holiday, and some of you are still in the process of learning. This is an opportunity for you to learn the entire poem again. I will read it out to you. In the first line of the poem, the poet writes that, rhetorically now, but what can be worthy of your life? What dearer than the gems of your dreams? The reason you are here, always strive to fly flags of joy and sail up streams. Powered by the breeze of love, your cause chattered in the ink of compassion, and fling roses wherever you pause, heaven on earth your destination. of things which would blot out that brief, or breach your sails with arrows unseen? No, rob you of life, rage is chief. Rage drags rags after you. Of charity, laughter, sweetness, and joy, rage is thief. Enemy of equanimity, rage spreads toxic fumes on every sin. In essence, rage spreads calamity. Its cause is your perception of storms breaking around, not upon your head. There are neither snakes, deviants, nor gnomes. As you think, so you feel. Watch your mind. Rage sets sail, can ring lag far behind. I'll fling roses wherever I bathe. My destination is heaven on earth. Now to literary devices used in the poem. I just read the poem out to you. I believe again that you can all recite this poem. By the end of the lesson, you remember that you will be assessed on the recitation of this poem. Now, literary devices used in the poem. The poet Lade Wosornu employs some figures of speech to buttress the ideas of relevance of human existence, consequences of rage, and source of rage. These are the three important parts of the poem, the three important points raised by the poet. And I mentioned them earlier. The poet describes three different points in the poem. The first one is the relevance of human existence, which, if I ask you, tell me, is to be wellspring of joy unto others, to always guarantee others' happiness, to always ensure that we leave positive mark in the minds of whomever we come across. And then the second part of the poem discusses consequences of rage. In the poem that we read earlier, the poet writes that rage is chief, rage is thief, rage is enemy of equanimity, rage drags rags after you, rage spreads toxic fumes. All of these are consequences of rage. And of course, if one is caught in this web, one is bound to fail to fulfill that purpose of his existence in the first place. And of course, lastly, the poet describes the source of rage. He describes the source of rage as your perception of things. In other words, it's just one's perception that causes one to be enraged. And this is why the poet warns against harboring unfounded thoughts. Then this lesson consequently focuses on the poet's use of rhetorical question, imagery, metaphor, and among others, personification. That means in the highlighted point, you have just 4 figures of speech there, but in the course of the lecture, you'll be given more than 4, and you'll be asked to list at least 5 of the literary devices used in this poem. But you must focus on the poet's use of rhetorical question. That's the question asked without demanding any immediate response. The poet's use of imagery. That's talking about the different images painted in the poem. Then we have the poet's use of metaphor, how each line of the poem is metaphoric and what each line of the poem metaphorically depicts, and among others, personification. You will agree with me that rage is extensively personified in the poem. In other words, human attributes are accorded rage in the poem, are given to rage in the poem. Rage is given the ability of dragging rag after you, of spreading toxic film, and among others, rage is said to be enemy of equanimity, enemy of calmness, something that is opposed to calmness. Now next on the slide, you see the use of rhetorical question in Radar of the Treasure Trove. It is very important I define rhetorical question, and that's why you have it there. Even if I ask you, I believe you can explain to me what a rhetorical question is. It is a form of question asked that does not require any answer, at least any immediate answer. In the lines that we're going to consider, you agree with me that when the poet speaker raises those questions, there is no one present to give the poet speaker immediate answers. That's why it is called rhetorical question. The poet uses this greatly to suggest the philosophical stance of the poem. and it is used for emphatic effect. It is thought-provoking. Some of the lines of the poem that exemplify rhetorical question, you see it highlighted there in sky blue color. The first line of the poem itself is rhetorical. The poet asks rhetorically, but what can be worthy of your life? He asks if there is anything at all that can be worthy of your life. This is a typical example of rhetorical question, and that's because it does not demand immediate response. There's nobody with the poet speaker to supply answer to this question raised immediately. So the first line of the poem is a typical example of rhetorical question. I want you to note that somewhere, such that if you ask to discuss the poet's use of rhetorical question, you can always pick it from the first line of the poem, where the poet asks rhetorically, but what can be worthy of your life? That's typical example of rhetorical question. This question sets the tone of the poem, and it explains the first point raised by the poet, which is the relevance of human existence. Now, I have mentioned that about 2 or 3 times now, where the poet says that the purpose of your existence is to be wellspring of joy unto others, to ensure others' happiness whenever you have the opportunity of doing so. So the first line is a typical example of rhetorical question. Note that somewhere. But what can be worthy of your life? Remember that the poet speaker asks the question further. Other examples are evident in lines 2 to 4 of the poem. So you can agree with me that the entire stanza 1 contains elements of rhetorical question. If you read the lines further, the second line we have, what dearer than the gems of your dream? The reason you are here, always strive to fly flags of joy and sail up streams. You see that they always strive to fly flags of joy there simply appears to answer the questions posed by the poet speaker. But what can be worthy of your life? What's dearer than the gems of your dreams? The reason you are here? All of these are rhetorical questions, and the poet seems to prefer answer to those questions. Always strive to fly flags of joy. Flags of joy. Always ensure others' happiness. Always ensure that you are wellspring of joy unto others. Then the final stanza of the poem also contains elements of rhetorical question. If you go to the last stanza of the poem, you see where the poet asked rhetorically, can ruin lag far behind? Rage set sail. Can ruin lag far behind? This is used to explain root of anger, which is one's perceptions. That when one is enraged, it becomes increasingly difficult for one to be wellspring of joy unto others. In fact, someone who is enraged cannot guarantee his own happiness, let alone others' happiness. So rage can ruin lag far behind. Now, the poet explains the root of anger as one's perception. And these perceptions are often wrong, they are often non-existent, and they are often inconsequential. I want to believe that you can clearly cite examples of rhetorical questions. The first stanza, you have elements of rhetorical question, and then the last stanza, you have elements of rhetorical questions. Now, I am not restricting you to these 2 stanzas. You can always read through the entire poem and bring out similar expressions that appear to raise questions rather than answers. Then subsequently, the poet discusses imagery. Imagery is another literary device used in the poem by this poet to convey his ideas to the readers. Now, last time, at least before you went on holiday, I listed different types of imagery. We have visual imagery, we have gustatory imagery, we have olfactory imagery, we have tactile imagery, and of course all of these, visual has to do with the eye, auditory has to do with ear, tactile has to do with touch, olfactory has to do with your nose, that's talking of your sense of smell, and gustatory has to do with your taste. Now, imagery is defined as the poet's use of words to paint mental pictures or images in the mind of readers. with a view to having the reader relate to the persona's experience. In fact, I can tell you that there's no poem you read that you don't see elements of imagery there. Because before the poet writes down his ideas, he has already visualized certain things. There are certain images he wants to paint in your mind. Such writer wants to paint in your mind. Certain mental pictures that he wants to paint in your mind. So every poem that you pick, you have examples of imagery. And that includes Raider of the Treasure Trove. The poet paints certain images or pictures in the mind of the reader with a view to having the reader relate to the persona's experience. Then some examples of imagery in this poem are evident in the expression powered by the breeze of love and chattered in the ink of compassion. These are used to describe the image of man as he navigates life. In the process of man trying to be wellspring of joy unto others, the poet writes that is powered by the breeze of love and chattered in the ink of compassion. And also the expression heaven on earth, your destination, suggests a pleasant experience. Note that all of these are visual imagery. The poet explains that, he concludes that if you check the last stanza of the poem or thereabout, the poet seems to suggest that wherever he finds himself, he wants to fling roses. He wants to guarantee others happiness. In fact, he promises to guarantee others happiness to ensure that he causes others to be happy. He causes others to laugh rather than lament. And that's why he says, heaven on earth, my destination. It suggests a pleasant experience. The poet speaker probably feels fulfilled, having guaranteed others happiness, having left indelible mark, that's positive mark now, in the minds of others. Then finally, there's visual imagery drawn from marine, as evident in flying flags of joy and sail up streams. Then we have personification. Personification simply means transference of human qualities to inanimate objects or abstract quality. When human attributes are transferred to non-living things, we say it is personification. Now, what is personified in this poem is rage. Rage. This device is predominantly used in stanzas 2 and 3 of the poem. And those lines are quoted here. No robbery of life, rage is chief. Rage drags rags after you. Of charity, laughter, sweetness, and joy, rage is thief, enemy of equanimity. To pick it from the last line there, equanimity simply means calmness. One cannot be enraged and still be calm at the same time. Rage is personified as enemy of equanimity. Now, picking the first line of the quoted lines here, rage is chief. Rage robs you of life. Now, rage is something that deprives you of your happy moment. If it deprives you of your happy moment, there's no way to deprive you the opportunity of fulfilling your obligation, which is to be wellspring of joy unto others. The poet writes that rage robs you of life. Rage is given the ability of robbing you of life, of robbing you of those things that are precious to you. Then in the next line, the poet personifies rage again by writing that rage drags rags after you. Rage is given the ability of dragging rags after you. Then rage is described as pilferer of charity, as something that steals your laughter, that takes sweetness away from you, and that seizes your joy. Rage is thief, an enemy of calmness, enemy of equanimity. I will expect you to know how to cite these lines to discuss the poet's use of personification. You can just tell me largely that the poet personifies rage. And of course, all of these points explain how the poet personifies rage. Rage is thief. Rage is enemy of equanimity. Rage is pilferer of laughter, of sweetness and joy. When I say pilferer, I mean something that steals. It steals your laughter, it steals your sweetness, and it is said to steal your joy. So you can see that the poet personifies rage extensively in the poem Raider of the Treasure Trove. In the lines quoted in the preceding slide, that's the slide before this, rage is extensively given human qualities. It is given the ability of dragging rags after you. You know, rage is also said to be pilferer, that's thief in bracket, I explained that earlier, of sweetness, laughter, and joy. Take note of all these points. Then still in the last line of the quoted stanza, rage is said to be enemy of calmness. That's enemy of equanimity, enemy of calmness. And another example of personification, so we don't just end it there. Another example is seen where rage is portrayed as something that spreads toxic fumes everywhere. Rage is imbued with human attributes as it relates the destructive consequence of rage. Rage spreads toxic fumes everywhere. Now, when I say toxic, I mean something that is harmful. You know, harmful to health, or you know, something that is dangerous, that is negative. So rage spreads toxic fumes everywhere, not just in some places. It spreads toxic fumes all around you, and it is given that human attributes, just as the poem relates the destructive consequence of rage. Then the next figure of speech used in the poem is enjambment. Enjambment. Now, another word for enjambment is run on line. Some students will erroneously call this run off line. It is called run on line. And what it means is that an idea can flow from a line of a poem into another without a pause. It is a poetic device in which there is a flow of idea or thoughts from one line of a poem into another without a pause. Examples of enjambment abound in this poem. We have, many examples of enjambment in this poem where if you have not read the subsequent line, you don't fully understand the idea the poet tries to convey. Now, you can see lines 3 to 9 of the poem here. If you look at lines 3 and 4 and check the left-hand side, lines 3 and 4 are quoted, and on your right-hand side, the idea of enjambment is well explained. Now, lines 3 to 4 of the poem, we have the reason you are here, always strive to fly flags of joy and sail up streams. If you check your right-hand side, right after that, you'll see always strive in quotes. Always strive there in line 3 is still an incomplete idea until you have read line 4. You don't get the full idea expressed by the poet. Always strive. Now, strive to do what? That's to fly flags of joy and sail up streams. Always strive is an incomplete idea in line 3. There can only be full grasp of idea expressed when the subsequent line is read. You ask yourself, if I just come to you and I say always strive, you will ask me, always strive to do what? That's to fly flags of joy and sail up streams. The poet uses that at line 4 to explain the relevance of human existence. That's fly flags of joy, the wellspring of joy unto others. But that idea is not conveyed entirely in line 3. It leaves the idea hanging when you read always strive alone. But the moment you read line 4, the entire idea is fully conveyed. Another example is seen in line 5 of the poem. I quoted lines 5 to 9, right underneath line 4 there, in your left-hand side. Powered by the breeze of love, your cause. Now, if you stop there, you'll see that there is no idea conveyed yet. In line 6, we have chattered in the ink of compassion and fling roses wherever you pause, heaven on earth, your destination, of things which will blot out that brief. Now, you see that your cause in line 5 is incomplete without reading the next line of the poem. Your cause chattered in the ink of compassion. That still explains purpose of man's existence. That's to be compassionate unto others, to ensure that one is wellspring of joy unto others, to always bring laughter, to bring smile to the faces of others. So that's all of these explain the poet's use of enjambment. So far we've explained the poet's use of personification, the poet's use of imagery. Now we have the poet's use of enjambment. And of course we've mentioned the poet's use of a rhetorical question. Now to the evaluation. I think by now you should know how to describe treasure trove. When we say trove, that's like a box, jewelry box. You should be able to describe that. Then list 5 figures of speech used in the poem. You can tell me that the poet uses a personification, the poet uses enjambment. You have to list 5 figures of speech used in the poem. You have to cite 4 examples of rhetorical questions in the poem. Obviously, you have those examples in the first stanza of the poem, and you have another example in the last stanza of the poem. You can even focus on those 2 different stanzas in your discussion of the poet's use of rhetorical questions. All you have to do is give a very good introductory paragraph where you explain the entire idea discussed in the poem and how the poet uses rhetorical questions to convey those ideas. Those ideas or those examples can be found in stanzas 1 and 4 of the poem. That's first stanza and the last stanza of the poem. Then you have to explain the poet's use of imagery.